So you've got your hands on your first 3D printer, and what's the ultimate thing to rip off that bed before anything else? Obviously, you're going to print a helmet from either your favorite series or movies, doesn't matter. But how do we then take that from just something you've 3D printed and make it nice and smooth and clear and a finished product like this? Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tom, and today we're going to be talking about the final steps of post-processing a 3D print. Now, in the last video, we talked about the first steps, which were sanding something and using some filler primer, then going back over it with some wet sanding and filling in those little gaps with some spot putty. In today's video, we're actually going to go through some of the last steps straight off that. So we're going to follow up with the same helmet. We've got a phase 2 clone tripper helmet that I've got drying right now. And as soon as that's dry, we're going to go over with some more sandpaper and then hit it with some filler primer and then step into paint. Let's go.
So where we left off, guys, we had just gone over this with some spot putty, and then we hit it with 150 grit sandpaper and wet sanding. Now I'm coming in some of these areas that are a little more detailed, a little smaller, and I'm using a Dremel just with a simple head on it. You can use a number of different things. You could use a toothpick with a bit of sandpaper around it just to clean up these rough spots. And there's a few of these in helmets like this, just where some supports have gone in, or if you're not using supports, where you might have a little bit of droopage. It's also where, when we're using things like filler primer, we get a little bit of build up sometimes in areas like this. Now, someone actually gave me advice the other day and said if you don't have a Dremel, you can stick some sandpaper over an old electric toothbrush. Now, they did specify old electric toothbrush. Don't go doing this with a toothbrush you intend to use. And they specifically told me don't use their wife's toothbrush. She didn't take that well. Now, as I'm doing this, guys, I am realizing that this video is mostly sanding. Now, I used an Aussie Dremel. It's not actually a Dremel. That's sort of like Kleenex. It's the brand thing, but it's a sanding tool from Aussie. And I'm using an Aussie palm sander here. Now, the first one goes for about $55 at Bunnings. You can just run in and grab that, guys. Or this Aussie tool here, I think I grabbed for about $35 on special at one point. But as I said, you don't have to use this brand, you don't have to use these tools, you can just use sandpaper, you can use a sanding block, a small palm sander, a mouse sander, a belt sander. I am now just listing different sanders. Anyway, doesn't matter what tools you have, guys, all of this can be done. These are just some of the tools that I prefer and that I use and that are within a lower budget. And you can just pick up at Bunnings here in Australia. Now, I have come in with some water here, guys, just doing some wet sanding. As I said, it just reactivates some of that putty and some of those things to make sure it is nice and smooth. What I will say, though, is if you're using any sanding tool, do not hover on one area at a time, particularly when you're doing it on 3D printed products. If you focus on one area and don't move around, it will heat up and it will start to melt. And believe me, you do not want that. It really starts to damage your print. And honestly, there's not really any coming back from it. Alright, guys, here's the bit you're waiting for. We are in the paint booth and we're about to hit this with some more filler primer. So, this is the filler primer I use. I grabbed this from Super Cheap Auto. It's about $19 a tin. It's just Polycraft filler primer. Don't get the putty. Can't recommend enough. I can't say it enough. Don't get the putty. Stick with the filler primer. Now, I'm just purging my can to start because this stuff always comes out watery. Wait until you get a nice grey solid colour coming out, and then we're going to start spraying from side to side, and we're going to start spraying off the product and then finish on the other side and start again. We're just giving this a light dusting, guys. If we go over this too heavy, it starts to drip and pool and it gets too thick. And honestly, with filler primer, it does not dry if the layers are too thick. and everything underneath will stay fairly wet, which is going to create a nice heavy pull on it, which is just going to pull down the filler primer. It starts to make lumps, it starts to make it drip like goo and glue, and it's really horrible, and it will affect your final product and how your paint sits on top of it, because it will just then start to crack and damage everything under the weight of the paint on top of the wet filler primer. So go nice and slow, take your time, let it dry before hitting a couple of layers. You just want that tiny bit of a shine. Now that we've hit this with filler primer, guys, and we've let it dry, and I mean thoroughly dry, this stuff doesn't actually take that long. Just to be safe, if it's a nice warm day, give it about an hour. We're going to hit this again with some wet sanding. This time I'm coming in with a 1200 grit sandpaper, so it is very smooth. We're just going to hit this one last time all over in just little rough spots and little spots where we might have pulled a little bit. We're just going to fix this up and finalize it before giving it that last coat of filler primer. So there you have it, guys. We are ready for our final coat of filler primer. Now in the next video, I'm going to go over taping off and painting and finalizing this helmet. These are just a few of the paints that I like to use, guys. I do not have a shortage of paints, as you can see, and I have tried every paint under the sun you can get here in Australia. If you have a preference of paint, let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you in the next video.